5 years ago, we would be approached by a customer saying, can you integrate Prolog to system X? And Prolog has an open API, so we could always do that. It's had an open API for a decade now. But we would run into competitive products where they're like, no, we're not allowing you to integrate. And I think those are the companies that are being left behind now, because you have to be open, you have to integrate to other systems. It's just the way the world is working now.
These are the true stories
of the shared pains
facing designers,
builders, inspectors,
and operators
on our quest to
streamline collaboration
in the digital age.
Find out what happens
when industry and technology
stop playing nice
and start getting real.
We are the Construction Progress
Coalition.
And this is the Shared Pains Podcast.
Welcome back to the Shared Pains Podcast. My name is Sasha Reed, and as your host, my role is to ensure each and every perspective is represented as we tackle these shared pains of traditional contract and culture that are preventing teams from understanding technology in order to harness its full potential. Today, we're going to dive into the weeds a little bit and talk about the Application Programming Interface, or API, to better understand how it's impacting workflow efficiency at the project level. Introducing our very technical guest perspectives for this episode is CPC's Executive Director and roving reporter, Nathan Wood.
Thanks, Sasha. To help us look at both the benefits and shared pains behind open APIs, let's first welcome
Jodan Hoff. I'm the Professional Services Manager for the Trimble Project and Program Management Group. Currently, Prolog software, Project Site software, eBuildR software. I've been heading a team that's mostly been technical, building integrations into our project management platforms for the last 13 years. So well-versed in the technical side, what customers are asking for.
Jordan and I presented together at the Trimble Dimensions Conference in November 2018 on the intersection of open API capabilities and the need for workflow standardization through a common data exchange. The following week down at Procore Groundbreak, I got a history lesson in software integration from
Ajoy Krishnamurthy. I'm with Acumatica. I've been in technology space for all my professional career. I worked at Microsoft on many different product lines throughout my time frame. I was in product management for Visual Studio and .NET, really focused on the developer, not the construction developer. 4 years ago, I joined Acumatica, a cloud ERP company, which we'll talk more about.
Yes, we will. But speaking of Microsoft, one of their products that you might already be paying for and not taking advantage of is Power BI, BI standing for Business Intelligence. It's a visual dashboarding software that can point, which basically means using APIs, to different sources of data inside or outside your company that may or may not be from Microsoft. Now, if you're in need of those fancy dashboards and want that but have no idea where to begin, you should talk to
Jason Ramsey. I'm the CEO and founder of Construction BI. We're a data analytics and reporting solution company based out of Columbus, Ohio, and serving clients around the world.
Jason brings a wealth of knowledge around data and analytics, and we're excited to have him on board as a CDX delegate representing Construction BI. Our final guests are from BuildR, or BuildR, a new API-first solution focused on reducing the burden of closeout documentation. Meet
Caleb Taylor at Gonzalez. So we are actually a relatively new startup. We were founded earlier this year by the three of us together. One is Mike Stock. And to give you a little bit more of a backstory, two of us, me and Mike, actually worked at Procore for 5 years before we started BuildR.
It's clear this open API mentality is not only changing the tools we use to communicate with one another, it's changing the fundamental process of how software is built in the first place.
We love Procore. We're still building onto the platform. But the day I moved from being an intern to a full-time hire at Procore, I had a conversation with Tui, and I was like, hey man, this place is awesome. I love it here, but there will come a time where I'm going to start my own business, and I just want to let you know up front. And he was super supportive the whole time, and those 5 years, we learned so much.
If you ask me, the disruption of software development strategy over the past decade is a great forecast of what's to come in design and construction, as more projects move to integrated contracting and off-site fabrication. But first, back to you, Sasha.
The process is fairly simple. Digest, debate, decide, and deliver. First, we'll digest what an API is and debate how they work or don't in the real world. After hearing from implementation experts that are working at the front lines of open integration, you can decide the intersection of business and individual value that APIs promise and how to deliver them effectively. But to help us understand what the hell an API actually is, let's bring in Nathan and Dan. So I think one of the things we could do to kind of start the conversation first is let's take a step back and talk to what is an API.
Most people have probably ordered from Amazon. When you order from Amazon, Amazon isn't calling up the warehouse and saying, hey, Sasha ordered a new book. Go find this book. And then they're going to a shelf and finding the book and then opening up a box and packaging it. And then they're not driving over to the FedEx shop and saying, hey, this is the book. It's going to Sasha Reed. Here's my Post-it note with the address. Those are all APIs.
Another good example of APIs is this whole smart home battle between Google Home and Apple iHome and these different ones. So everybody that's works with Alexa or works with Google Assistant, those are all APIs essentially, right?
I would say most organizations have APIs and don't even realize it. Mainly on the internal level, when your employee shows up to work, they clock out at the end of the day, they fill out their timesheet, submit their timesheet. It automates a review procedure to payroll. Payroll reviews it. It goes into the financial, prints off a check at the end of the week. Then you get your check mailed to you.
Or better yet, it's direct deposit, right? I mean, Ajoy talked about
this industry was hungry and demanding a modern, solution, that can break these barriers and break these silos. We built Acumatica from the ground up for the cloud. So we are one of the born in the cloud solution, offering on-demand scale, all the flexibility from accessing the system without having to use a remote desktop or a VPN client and so on, which feels so, 90s, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And then with the mobile devices, who doesn't have a smartphone in their pocket anymore? That's the day we live in, where easy access is not nice to have, but it's demanded.
But that's virtually impossible to do if you're stuck in a legacy on-premise solution, right?
And the idea of it really allowing that information to flow as freely as possible, which sounds really simple, but it's actually
as freely as possible or as freely as allowable, right? I mean,
correct.
I think the more we go back to Procore's cute little video on Daddy, what's an API, of comparing it to a relationship and kind of when two people love each other and they want to share information, and it's true because you can't really develop and create APIs without a level of trust and a relationship, right? And even just the difference between an internal API within your own company's firewall versus an external API that goes out to another project stakeholder at the project level means a huge difference in security and trust and everything else.
Well, okay, then that leads us to a good point here where we could start to debate this. So how can API integrations address our shared pains, especially when it comes to that manual re-entry of data from application to application?
Yeah, I think that waste depends totally on the perspective that you're coming from. I mean, if you're an executive, as Jason describes, then your shared pain is
they want access to their data, and people aren't just using a single system. So, you might be using a great project management platform like Procore. Maybe you've got an ERP integration, but you're not integrating everything. Maybe you've got a pile of Excel spreadsheets or other, your CRM, whatever it is. People are ending up with data in a lot of different silos right now. And ultimately, people are learning that there's a lot of value in all of that data, and especially when you can bring it back together in one place. And that's what Power BI and that's what Construction BI helps companies do, is bring it all back together. And then it's like, well, if we could automate our monthly construction status reports by tying our ERP data together with our Procore data, we could save 4 hours per project per PM in just prep work.
Or let's say your perspective as an engineer at the end of a project, you're probably more concerned with automating all your tedious handover requirements. These shared pains are why point solution startups like BuildR exists.
People have been coming by our booth. I'm able to start with, hey, how's your closeout process? Is it pretty fun? And I've yet to meet anybody that says it's a beautiful process and we enjoy doing it. We look forward to it. It sucks. We know it sucks. And so that's what we're trying to solve for, is a way to, the way the product works is through Procore's submittal tool now, you can actually gather documents from the subs, and we will create open submittals for you. When they reply to close it out, we automatically scoop it up. We automatically export everything you need from Procore, RFIs, drawings, and then we automatically hyperlink everything together so that it's independent of any platform. They're PDFs with all the attachments in line that link to each other, and you can actually hand it off at the end of the job right away.
Is when you look at and quantify it, how many times you click on a file to access a file, how many times you share that file, how long it takes you to dig through your emails. Then this API, then is that not the assembly line to allow that information to flow freely?
Call it an assembly line or call it automation. I mean, at the end of the day, what's required is standardization.
Everyone is doing things differently, right? So MBJ, we had to build something specific to them and specific sort of to how Skanska and MBJ wanted to work together. And, then we had to build it for another software, and then we have to build it for another software. We're building all these adapters for different software. And each time it's like kicking off a brand new project.
And it's hard enough getting internal standardization as a company, let alone this external standardization between project to project.
And people think integration should be easy, but when you talk about the concept of sharing data between system A and system B, you have to just provide so much structure around every single data field that's being shared between the two systems. And the common examples are projects. What is a project number to company A and company B? It's going to be a very different thing, and just mapping project to project. RFI numbers are a good example. I number it with 5 numbers, but it's a 3-digit number over here, and our numbers don't align. And you just to work through that translation, to work through all of that detail, is really an upfront cost on any sort of integration project.
On the technology side, you have organizations right now that are rebuilding their next iterations of their platform so they can be API centric.
Yeah, I really learned after talking to Jodan that just having an open API doesn't necessarily mean that it's as efficient as it can be, because there is a new level of standards that's required.
We would be approached by a customer saying, can you integrate Prolog to system X? And Prolog has an open API, so we could always do that. It's had an open API for a decade now. But we would run into competitive products where they're like, no, we're not allowing you to integrate. And I think those are the companies that are being left behind now, because you have to be open, you have to integrate to other systems. It's just the way the world is working now. The collaboration is king.
One thing about these API-first startups like BuildR is that they're really good at identifying where our shared pains are and finding solutions to them quickly through APIs.
Initially, we wanted to connect some platforms. We wanted to connect your document management solution with Procore. So Box, Dropbox, Ignite with Procore. And so that's what we did. We created an integration that made the data flow both ways, automatically exporting things from Procore to save PEs a lot of time. But we noticed that the people that loved this integration the most said that it was helping them speed up the closeout process. So then we were like, okay, well, what if we just build a closeout tool? And so some of our users were the first ones to say, this is how we're using it. Could you also do some other features about closeout? And so then we were able to take a step past the guys that connect platforms, and now this week we've been able to launch this product that's a full closeout product that's intimately tied to Procore, thanks to Ed and Mike's knowledge of the platform that they helped to build.
Yeah, I think there's a term that I'm hearing more and more, which is API first, and a lot of these newer startup technology companies are really kind of have the benefit of they don't have this legacy technical debt, which is your success and your debt at the same time. So this idea of kind of coming to market with an API first approach, understanding that is the reality. We were saying this earlier, this isn't an if path, this is the path. It's just how are we getting on that path?
And how we get there starts with who you're targeting and why they should care.
These API integrations, how can these potentially backfire?
A while ago, there was a flaw in Facebook's API on one of the systems that they used. So literally anyone could go in and delete photos from your Facebook account. And that was a flaw in their API. So it goes into another thing of quality. We have to have this another layer of auditing and validation and understanding of the APIs, as well as, all the different things that come with that, the trust that we have to have in each other to make sure that we trust the information you're providing us, and you trust that, we're providing you with the right information, as well as, understanding the flow of all this data back and forth. And again, making sure that on both ends, me as the owner of maybe where the data is going to come from, to you as the final archive of the systems, making sure that both locations are secure.
Well, and that's a great point, Dan. Ajoy reminds us that
Tool is a tool, right? If your business process and your buy-in to that is it's not fixed. If there's issues, then what the tool can do is make sure that you fail consistently and you fail fast.
Yep.
It's not just about the tool or the technology, it's also about the buy-in into the organization and changing some of the business processes. Trust me, how we used to build things 10 years ago is different than how we build things today.
One of the convergences that I'm seeing, coming from the technology side and also interacting with industry, is this idea of taxonomy. Because we're moving towards a data-centric business, business is becoming more and more data-centric. This idea of thinking in database frameworks, so that idea of taxonomy is becoming more and more of the common language, and which I guess takes us to our next, which is to decide what data and process standards are required for an open API solution to work as advertised.
Well, one thing that's certainly changed since this open API movement is this idea that you need a one-size-fits-all solution.
We all, as consumers and as in the business role, we use so many cloud services already, right? We use Office 365, for emails and so on. We might use DocuSign or Adobe Sign for e-signing. Might use Acumatica for accounting. You might use some estimating software, Procore for project management.
Open APIs are really leveling the playing field, where I think it matters less about what tool you're using and more about how you're using it and how it talks to one another and how you're measuring success.
It's average response times, it's days to close. Sometimes it's much more granular, like maybe even within an RFI, like if you take that as a data set and a workflow, maybe what's my cycle times with my architects, but not just within one project, but across my portfolio. So you can see, is there a pattern basically happening from the time I send it to the architect to the time they respond, to the time that my own personnel then marks it and makes it an official response or distributes it or whatever. What are those different cycle times? Then you can start measuring how are these partners doing in aggregate, because I'm using the same people on lots of different jobs oftentimes. And you may realize or think you've got a performance problem one place, but is it kind of a pervasive problem that's going on other places too? And tools like Power BI really quickly can expose that. You can see the trend, and using advanced visualizations and the types of things that they're just out of the box in Power BI, but they're very different than what a lot of people are used to.
Jason brings up a great point about the cultural shift that's required to really reach this Moneyball for construction, type of a culture. But, APIs at the end of the day are not just about connecting data and transparency. It's about connecting efficiencies, and that, as long as we have certain established taxonomies and these kind of universal translators
to name and set up exactly how you want everything to name, so it's different than just mass exporting something with weird names and formats that are tough to use. We can actually decide, okay, for this, I want this subject title. I want this many zeros in front. I want this. How does your company want the naming structure to be for submittals, RFIs, all this? Set it up, press go, and we'll do the rest.
Well, and really what I think APIs allow is for that process to no longer be static, but to be dynamic, because we can move from this idea where standards have to be system-driven, and that now standards can be user-driven, and that APIs will translate from one system of record to another. But again, what are those rules? How do we need to play the game differently to make this work?
It goes back to the earlier discussion of kind of that trust and validation and auditing. It kind of adds a new granular perspective of how we work, but it pushes us out of the norms to, again, own a new process and really understand that process.
Too often technology goes, oh, you can have anything you want, but you can't really have anything you want, right? You
No.
have it.
I'm here to tell you no.
If you're selling software to this industry, don't tell them they can have everything. Bad move.
Well, then that kind of takes us to the deliverer. Who has already implemented some of these open API integrations, and what are those benefits we're seeing and we're observing?
I mean, one of the great tangible ROI examples is our friend DJ Phipps over at XL Construction, who I know they were an early user and piloter of BuildR, and Kayla was talking about some of their metrics and benefits.
They've been using it and loving it so far. We've got a few others that have said this, at the very minimum, saves RPEs 2 days a month of time. And they're saying, if I extrapolate that out 12 months, this is very easy to show that this saves us at least $10,000 per job. And that doesn't even consider the value of getting that PE onto the next job a month sooner. And that's our whole goal, is to allow you guys to not sit and wait for 3 weeks at the end while you're waiting for people to send you documents.
Well, and I think in addition to the direct benefits of an API like this between Procore and BuildR, creates indirect benefits of really pushing other large industry players like Trimble to get involved in the open API game.
Connect is still our platform, and we're going to be doing more in our CDE, and really that is the answer for Trimble. When you own multiple Trimble products, and want to create a project or a user of Trimble software, I do it one place, and that will be kind of this Connect platform. And the other answer is, starting to build integrations between our own internal software, from a project control system into eBuilder, a Prolog into eBuilder. And what I'm pushing for is I don't want that to be the direct integration between, even though we own both of those software, we own both of those. I don't want that to be the direct integration. I'm really pushing for internally. Let's make it a CDX style integration. Let's have a middleware so we can publish an RFI to this middleware, and let's subscribe on the other side, and just have this centralized kind of database concept. Because Trimble's gonna acquire some more companies, right? that's what we do. So we need to get away from this concept of these bridges in between individual software, push things into Connect, and then that just opens up the world to other software, and external or internal.
So I, as a user, I shouldn't be concerned about the seams between the products. That's not, as a user, I want to make sure that's not something obvious to me, but the information and the business process is flowing seamlessly, between an accounting system into a project management into estimating, into pay application, back into accounting.
Well, and that's such an important point, that these technology guys, they don't understand our business processes as well as we do. But if we can communicate that to them, then they can connect them together much easier with API.
I think one of the things that we haven't really talked about here, but Nathan, you and I always think from the human lens many times. What is the value? So sticking on this idea of delivering, what then is the value if we're actually able to leverage metrics, raw data, it's unbiased, in order to then have the hard conversations with project team members where we're actually looking at an RFI response time. And with that response time, we can see, gosh, this one team is always late. This is a human factor, I guarantee you. So how are we able to leverage some of that raw data in order to have that human interface where it's no longer about bias or pointing the finger, but it's literally saying, I notice I've benchmarked you against these other groups. Where can we help unblock you? How is this going to help that human interface?
Well, Jason talks about how much of this is just about overcoming the fear of being measured or measuring your data in the first place.
A lot of people are scared to go to a BI tool because they say, either our data's too dirty, it's not going to be meaningful, or we're not using the systems enough for it to be meaningful. And my response to that is, you need a measuring stick to improve. And your data, the way it is, the as-is, the as-built state of your data, let's call it, that's real. And you have to start from somewhere. So you should start by measuring it the way it is, even if it's bad and you don't like the picture it's telling, that's what it is. So you need to incrementally measure it, analyze it, set KPIs of where you want to go ultimately.
Jason really hits on this balance of setting key performance indicators, KPIs, but yet also creating a culture that allows you to make it safe to fail.
Right. So usually what I recommend to people is, don't just adopt something or buy Power BI because it's something that theoretically can help you. Like, you need to actually have problems. You need to know what those problems are. You don't have to tackle the biggest problem first. I usually recommend tackling low-hanging fruit. Start small, figure out where you have a pain point, where exposing the problem, addressing it, monitoring and measuring it can actually help. Get some small wins, maybe pilot it with a single project. A lot of people will start at the executive dashboard type side and want to just go all in. But a lot of times you suffer with adoption if you don't start small and make sure you're doing it the right way and you're measuring the right things. Because if you're measuring things that ultimately people aren't going to be responsive to, then you're just measuring for the sake of measuring.
Adopting APIs is all about a combination of increasing the incentive to want to share and also reducing the burden or the barriers to sharing. And one of those big burdens or barriers to sharing or being on the same platform is cost, especially if it's individual user costs.
Like, one of the things I talk about, it might sound a little salesy, but the key point to keep in mind, in Acumatica, we don't charge by user. So one of the key things why that matters is a lot of times what happens is when you buy a software or a technology, you buy user licenses. So Nathan, you might be working on as an employee, you got a license, but Nicole doesn't. So guess what? She doesn't have access to the data, even though she's playing a critical role in the company. And that's where we said, that's not the way we should operate in. Give them access. If there's a field technician that needs access to a data with, of course, the right security and access rights. It's not the wild, wild west. Everybody get access to every data. That's not what we're talking about. But the fact that the field worker can have access to an update on a project, so they can make a better decision in the field. That should be an expectation.
I mean, so in this world where APIs can literally do anything, it's really up to us to be able to communicate what are the standards, what are the protocols that it should be following at a company level and at a project level, right, Dan?
It again opens up these new risks and avenues. My IT department understands my IT department. They don't understand your IT department. So those are a lot of things that start to flow and enter this picture of APIs in this new area that we're moving forward with.
This whole API discussion is very much ingrained with the transparency and the trust discussion, in that APIs can protect that level of, well, I don't necessarily want to share this information with this person, but again, only when you understand well enough how that API works and how to control it from job to job or project to project. Because I think we have way too many options out there to choose from. So at least this will give us the ability to choose once we know the requirements that we have.
We were discussing earlier about when a new glazing product comes out on the market, it is our duty to install it, to understand it, to own that process. So just like these APIs, it's our duty to understand what we want to do, understand what connections we want to make and what value it's going to bring to us, and own that process.
CPC wishes to thank each of our guests from Acumatica, Trimble, Construction BI, and BuildR. We also want to thank Procore for hosting these interviews during Groundbreak 2018. Be sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Next episode will focus on the shared pains driven by a lack of diversity in design and construction, evaluating its overall impact on project performance. Thank you for listening to the Construction Shared Pains podcast. We look forward to joining you here next time.